Because my husband chose Hollywood over our marriage, I exposed his darkest secret. There are scars fame can't hide. I used to believe that the flashing cameras could blind the world to the truth. That if you smiled wide enough on the red carpet, nobody would look close enough to see the cracks beneath the gown, the bruises behind the makeup, the secrets hiding in the shadows. In Hollywood, illusion is everything. And for years, I was part of the illusion. My name is Victoria Hayes, and I was married to Ethan Cross, the golden boy of Los Angeles, a self-made producer who built his empire from nothing but charm, ambition, and the kind of ruthlessness that wins awards in this town. To the public, we were untouchable. A perfect couple stepping out of a mansion in Beverly Hills, dripping in couture and success. Behind those gates, though, it was different. Behind the champagne toasts and magazine covers, our marriage was crumbling like an old movie set propped up by plywood. What people saw was carefully staged, rehearsed for the cameras. What they didn't see was the silence at our dinner table, the distance in his eyes, or the way his phone always lit up with a name he never stopped chasing. Her name was Samantha Hart. An heiress who once ruled her world like a princess, and then watched it all collapse. To him, she was a memory he couldn't let go of. To me, she was a ghost that kept walking through the walls of my marriage. It all started long before the scandals, long before the lawsuits, long before the headlines. It began in a game, the kind people play when they've had too much wine and too little honesty in their lives. A game that stripped away the last layer of our facade and left me staring at a truth I couldn't ignore, and it all came crashing down on a night I will never forget, my birthday. The night of my 35th birthday should have been perfect. My friends had filled the room with laughter, the glasses of champagne glittered under the chandeliers, and someone had just wheeled out a cake so extravagant it looked stolen from a movie set. For a few fleeting moments, I felt like I could breathe again, until Ethan walked in. He arrived late, as always, still wearing the same suit he had stepped off the plane in. His tie hung loose, his eyes shadowed from 9 hours across the Atlantic. But he managed a smile, the kind of smile that had once charmed directors and investors alike. He kissed me on the cheek, whispered, "Happy birthday," and slipped into the role of the doting husband as if he'd been rehearsing it all the way from Paris. The truth was, I hadn't expected him to come. He had spent the week in Europe, handling business, though I knew Samantha Hart had been at his side, parading across film festivals in borrowed gowns. My friends exchanged glances when he appeared, but nobody said a word. Hollywood thrives on silence when secrets pay better than honesty. Later that evening, when the candles were lit and the room grew still, everyone leaned forward to hear my wish. I removed the diamond earrings Ethan had given me that morning, placed them carelessly on the table, and stared at the flames. My friends waited for the usual words: happiness, success, health. Ethan waited too, his hand resting casually on the back of my chair, as if he owned the very air I breathed. I drew in a breath, folded my hands as though in prayer, and said clearly enough for everyone to hear, "I wish for a divorce." The room fell silent. The kind of silence you only hear in a courtroom after a guilty verdict. Ethan's smile faltered, then froze completely. He looked at me as if I had just set fire to the cake in front of us. After a long pause, he forced a laugh. "Still angry? Huh? You think I didn't rush back here for you? I'm standing right here, Victoria. Can we not do this tonight?" But the words were empty, rehearsed, designed to mask the guilt that was practically dripping off him. I didn't even flinch. I met his eyes, unblinking. "Divorce, Ethan. I want a divorce. Say the word again if you need to hear it clearly." He clenched his jaw so hard the muscles in his face twitched. Then, in a sudden burst of rage, he kicked a chair so violently it slammed against the wall. The sound cracked through the house like a gunshot. My friends froze. Some pretended to check their phones, others slipped away quietly. No one dared interfere. Ethan inhaled sharply, then steadied himself, forcing composure back into his frame. "Enough. I remembered your birthday. I flew across continents to be here. I even cooked for you, Victoria. And this is how you thank me? Stop playing games. I'm taking a shower. You should calm down before you regret the things you're saying." He stormed upstairs without looking back, leaving me standing in front of the untouched cake, surrounded by the ashes of what should have been a celebration. And as I stared at the candles burning low, I realized something I should have known all along. He thought a birthday dinner and a few gestures of loyalty could erase the truth. He believed his presence alone was enough to keep me silent. But what he didn't know was that the truth was already unraveling, and the first thread had been pulled, because that night, after he disappeared upstairs, the phone on the table lit up with a name I knew all too well, Samantha Hart. The phone lit up again, glowing on the table beside my half-empty glass of wine. Her name? Samantha Hart. Twice in one night, like a shadow refusing to let me breathe. At first, I let it ring, savoring the silence that followed when she gave up. But then it rang again, longer this time, as if she already knew I was standing there, watching her name pulse across the screen. Something in me snapped. I picked up, pressed the speaker button, and let her voice fill the room. Where is he? Put Ethan on. Her tone was sharp, dripping with entitlement, like I was the intruder in her world, not the other way around. I leaned back on the sofa, lit a cigarette, and said nothing. Victoria, I know you can hear me. Don't play dumb. Give him the phone. He knows the code, and I don't. Do you hear me? The code. I can't get into his house without it. For a moment, I almost laughed. She sounded desperate, rattling on about a passcode like a spoiled child locked out of her candy store. But then she said it. The numbers, 942944. Tell him. It's the same for everything. My hand froze. Those 6 digits. The same code for our home security, the garage, his phone. I had asked him years ago what it meant. He had brushed it off, said it was random, something easy to remember. And I believed him, but later, one night when the house was quiet and he was asleep beside me, curiosity had dragged me to his phone. I typed those digits across the old 9 keypad. And there it was. Letters staring back at me like a confession. SAM.IT wasn't random. It had never been random. For years, the woman who haunted our marriage had been woven into the very locks that guarded our lives. Every door I walked through, every screen I touched, I was stepping over her name. I ended the call without another word, tossed the phone onto the couch, and poured myself another drink. Upstairs, the shower roared, water hitting tile. He thought. He was washing the guilt off him. But there are stains that never rinse away. I stared into the red swirl of my glass, the bitter taste on my tongue sharper than ever. That code was more than a number. It was proof. Proof that while I was his wife, she was his secret, etched into every password and every silence between us. And as the shower cut off and I heard his footsteps creak across the floorboards above, I knew there was no turning back. The next time he came down those stairs, I would be ready. Not with candles or wishes, but with papers, divorce papers. By the time Ethan came downstairs, hair damp and shoulders wrapped in a robe, I was waiting on the sofa. The glass of wine was gone. In its place, I held a manila folder. I didn't smile. I didn't move. I only watched as he walked toward the bar, humming faintly as if nothing had happened. He reached for a bottle. That was when I placed the folder on the table between us. Sign it. He turned, brows furrowed. What's this supposed to be? Divorce papers. For a moment, the room went still. His hand lingered on the neck of the bottle. Then he laughed, low and humorless. You're drunk. Stop this performance. I rose slowly from the sofa, walked toward him, and pressed the folder into his chest. I'm sober enough to know exactly what I'm doing. Either you sign, or we end this another way. His eyes hardened, jaw clenched. Another way? What the hell does that mean? I leaned closer, voice steady, almost cold. It means Samantha can spend the night outside, locked out of your precious Hollywood palace. Or worse, I make sure every studio head, every investor, every gossip site in this town knows that the producer they worship built his empire with lies and affairs. Sign it, Ethan. You don't get to choose me and her at the same time. He shoved the folder back at me, the papers scattering across the floor. Do you have any idea how insane you sound? I came back to you. He chose you. And this is how you treat me? No, I said. You came back to protect the image. You never chose me. You chose her, years ago, every time you typed that code. Every time you lied to my face. So either put your name at the bottom of that page, or I will burn down everything you've built. The mask slipped. His composure cracked. He stepped forward, so close I could see the water still clinging to his hairline. His hands balled into fists, but he didn't raise them. Instead, his voice dropped to a growl. Do you know what I hate about you, Victoria? The violence. Always the threats. Always the force. You can't talk, you can't love, you can only fight. I met his stare without blinking. And you can't tell the truth. That's why we're here. For a long, tense moment, it was a battle of silence, neither of us moving. Finally, he exhaled through clenched teeth, grabbed a pen from the counter, and bent over the folder. With one swift stroke, he signed his name at the bottom. Then he tossed the pen aside like it burned him. There. Happy now? His voice was bitter, almost mocking, but his eyes betrayed him. They were tired, hollow, the eyes of a man who knew the war wasn't over. I gathered the papers, my hand steady even as my heart raced. This is just the beginning. And I meant it. Because what he didn't realize yet was that the signatures on those pages weren't the end of our story. They were the opening act to a much darker truth, one buried deep in the years we thought we had left behind. People look at me now and see a polished woman, the owner of a fitness empire, someone who can walk into a room of producers and CEOs and not blink. What they don't see is the girl I used to be, the one raised in a house that smelled of cigarette smoke and broken promises. My mother was beautiful but reckless, always chasing men who left her emptier than before. My grandmother was the opposite. Hard, strict, and relentless. She chopped my hair short when I was 8, refused to let me wear dresses, and dragged me to self-defense classes while other girls played with dolls. Pretty fades, she used to say. Strength doesn't. It was because of her that I learned to fight. And because of her that I learned never to take anything from anyone without being ready to pay the price. Ethan grew up just a floor above me in the same shabby apartment block. His father was a decent man, a mechanic who died too young, stabbed in an alley because he tried to protect a stranger. Ethan was 12. I was 13. I'll never forget standing at the funeral. Watching him kneel at the coffin, face pale and unreadable. While others wept, he just whispered under his breath, he brought it on himself. Violence is poison. I'll never be like him. From that day, Ethan hated everything that reminded him of blood and fists. And I was the girl who only knew how to survive by fighting back. We were opposites, bound by grief, pulled together by circumstance, yet always drifting apart because of who we were at our core. I still remember the first time I truly stood up for him. We were in high school. A group of boys on the basketball team cornered him after practice. They didn't like the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, too smart, too aloof, too fragile. I overheard them plotting to break one of his fingers. Let's see how the prodigy writes essays with a busted hand, one of them joked. I followed, waited until they shoved him against the lockers, and then I stepped in. I don't even recall the punches, only the blur of movement and the sting in my knuckles. When it was over, 3 of them were bleeding and Ethan was staring at me like I was some kind of stranger. That night, he dragged me into his kitchen, cleaned the cuts on my hands with quiet precision, and finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost too calm. Don't fight for me again, Victoria. I don't want your violence tied to my life. I can live with humiliation. I can't live with blood on my hands, even if it isn't mine. That was Ethan. Brilliant, driven, but cold. A boy who built walls instead of bonds. A boy who believed endurance was nobler than retaliation. To him, violence was weakness. To me, violence was survival. And between us, that difference was a fault line that never stopped widening. Looking back, I see now that our marriage was doomed long before Hollywood lights blinded us, long before Samantha Hart walked back into his orbit. We were children of the same storm but raised with different shields. He despised the fighter in me, and I could never respect the cowardice in him, but at the time, I still thought love could fill the cracks. I thought if I stood by him long enough, gave enough of myself, he'd learn that survival sometimes required blood. I was wrong. And I wouldn't realize how wrong until years later, when a painting I once thought symbolized love revealed itself as nothing more than another lie. There was one thing I thought Ethan and I shared without question: the painting. For years, I believed it was ours, a symbol of my devotion, proof that I had seen him in ways no one else ever did. I still remember the night it began. He was a struggling assistant then, barely scraping by on small freelance projects, living off takeout and credit cards. I dragged him to an art exhibit in downtown LA, hoping to distract him from his failures. For 2 hours I drifted through abstract canvases I couldn't understand, but when I looked back, Ethan was frozen in front of one piece. A storm of oil strokes, blues and grays colliding like waves against cliffs. He stared at it with a longing I had never seen before, as if the painting could give him something I couldn't. We left, but he glanced over his shoulder at it all the way to the street. That look branded itself into my mind. So I scraped together every cent I had, my savings, tips from training clients, even sold a bracelet my grandmother once gave me, and bought it. Nearly $20,000. It was reckless, irresponsible. But I wanted to give him something that would anchor him in the darkest nights. When I unveiled it on his birthday, his face lit up. For once, Ethan Cross, the man who carried himself like stone, was speechless. He touched the canvas with trembling hands, then pulled me into an embrace. I thought I had given him the only gift that truly mattered. For years after, the painting followed us through every move, every house, every new chapter. From our cramped apartment in West Hollywood to the mansion in the hills, it was the one possession Ethan always insisted on hanging first, always in the best light. I told myself it was because of me, because of what I had sacrificed. I told myself it was love, until the night Samantha Hart stepped back into the frame. She was at our house, hovering close to him as always, her perfume thick in the air. She wandered into the living room and stopped dead in front of the painting. For a moment, her expression softened, then a sly smile curled at her lips. This, she said, running her fingers near the edge of the frame, was mine. Ethan, I can't believe you still kept it. I froze. My ears rang. What do you mean, yours? Her laugh was low, mocking. I painted it years ago. I signed it right there in the corner. Funny you never noticed. I rushed closer, eyes scanning the brushstrokes I thought I knew. And there it was. A faint scrawl in the lower right corner, half hidden in the shadows of the oil. Her initials. SH. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. All these years, I believed the painting was proof of my sacrifice, my love. In reality, it had been Samantha's all along, a relic of his obsession with her, disguised as mine. I smiled then, because what else could I do? I smiled with all the grace I had learned from Hollywood galas, even as my chest caved in. Of course, I murmured. Of course it was. That night, for the first time, I realized I had been living in a house of mirrors. Nothing was mine. Not the painting, not the man, not even the story I thought belonged to us. Everything had always been hers, and if the painting was betrayal disguised as devotion, then Samantha herself was the embodiment of that betrayal, princess of privilege. Predator cloaked as muse, Samantha Hart had always lived like the world belonged to her. She was born into money, the kind of wealth that could buy a new car for every day of the week and still leave enough to redecorate the mansion every season. By the time we were teenagers, she was already the type of girl people whispered about. In hallways, too perfect, too untouchable, too cruel. I met her in high school, the year her father's fortune still glittered across their estate in Bel Air. She transferred into our school for a single year, claiming she was bored with private academies and wanted to try normal life. But Samantha was never normal. She was a storm wrapped in silk, and from the moment she laid eyes on Ethan, she decided he would be her toy. She was relentless. At first, it was flirtation, a smile in class, a note slipped onto his desk, a sugary "tutor me" request she never meant. When he turned her down, the cruelty began. She spilled milk across his exams, accused him of stealing her pen, mocked him for wearing shoes that had seen better days. I watched him shrink under the weight of her attention, his shoulders curling inward, his voice quieter each day. He told me not to interfere, begged me to let it go. But I couldn't. I confronted her once after school, cornered her in the parking lot, and warned her that if she touched him again, I'd make sure she regretted it. Ethan never forgave me for that. He didn't see my defense as loyalty. He saw it as shame. That night he told me, cold as winter, "You don't understand, Victoria. We can't fight her. People like Samantha, you endure them, until you don't have to anymore." It was. Then I realized the truth. While I fought fire with fire, Ethan bowed to it. He admired her power even as she destroyed him. Years later, when her family's empire crumbled and the money vanished overnight, Samantha should have disappeared like every other fallen heiress. But Hollywood is a city that thrives on second acts. She clawed her way into Ethan's world, reinventing herself as an actress. She didn't have talent, but she had ambition, and more importantly, she had him. By the time I became his wife, she had become the ghost I could never banish. Every party, every event, she lingered on the fringes. A reminder of a chapter one thought we had closed. The irony is almost poetic. The same girl who once ruined his schoolwork now ruined his marriage. She was still the same spoiled princess, except now she wielded her arrogance not with spilled milk but with headlines, paparazzi, and whispered rumors on set. And Ethan, my brilliant, driven husband, never stopped circling her like a moth around fire. He called it unfinished business. I called it obsession, but I refused to let Samantha define me. If she was the princess of Hollywood's glittering lie, then I would carve out something real, something she could never touch. That was when I began building my own empire. For years, people assumed my life revolved around Ethan. The producer's wife, the woman who stood on his arm at premieres, smiling while he talked about box office numbers and distribution deals. They didn't know I had my own battles to fight, my own hunger gnawing at me every night we came home to a silent house. It started small, almost laughable to anyone watching from the outside. A rented studio in downtown Los Angeles, barely bigger than a storage unit, with peeling mirrors and second-hand mats. I trained women who had nowhere else to go, overworked assistants, wives of struggling actors, mothers who needed an hour away from chaos. I showed them how to breathe, how to sweat, how to reclaim their bodies. Ethan dismissed it as a hobby. "It keeps you busy," he'd say with that patronizing smile, the same one he reserved for interns. He didn't see the late nights I spent writing programs, studying nutrition, or editing workout videos on a borrowed laptop. He didn't see the way women left my classes taller than they came in, shoulders squared, eyes brighter, words spread faster than I imagined. One client became 3, 3 became 10, and soon I was training the wives of producers Ethan knew by name. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same men who shook his hand on the red carpet had wives who whispered about my classes at their charity luncheons. Within 2 years, I opened a second studio, this time in Beverly Hills. I will never forget the look on Ethan's face at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Cameras flashed, microphones pushed forward, and suddenly he was there, standing beside me, arm around my waist as though he'd built it all himself. He smiled for the reporters, cut the ribbon like a conquering hero, and whispered in my ear, Now this finally looks respectable. Respectable. That was the word he used. As if the sweat, the sacrifices, the nights I poured every ounce of energy into keeping women from breaking under the weight of the city weren't enough. Until he deemed it worthy, but something changed in me that day. As I looked into those cameras, I realized they weren't just seeing Ethan's wife anymore. They were seeing me. My name on the sign, my clients, my empire. For the first time, I wasn't standing in his shadow, and the more I grew, the more. He began to watch me with something new in his eyes. Not love. Not pride. It was recognition. The kind of wary recognition a man feels when he realizes the person he thought was safe to dismiss is now someone he might lose control of. I leaned into that power. I expanded, launched online programs, partnered with nutritionists, and began booking speaking events. My calendar filled, my voice carried further, and slowly, I cut through the ropes that had bound me to him. Ethan hated it. He never said it outright, but I saw it in the way his jaw tightened when I missed dinner for a seminar, or how he scrolled through his phone during my speeches, pretending to be bored. He wasn't bored. He was terrified because for the first time, I wasn't his dependent. I wasn't waiting for his approval. I wasn't the girl who bought him a painting to prove my worth. I was a woman with her own empire, her own name, her own stage, and that, more than Samantha, more than the whispers and scandals, was the crack he couldn't patch. But what I didn't know then was that success doesn't shield you from betrayal. It only makes the knives sharper. And the proof of Ethan's lies was already waiting for me, sealed in photographs, captured in video, ready to shatter what little was left of the life we built. The first envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning. No return address, just my name. Written in block letters, like something pulled from a detective show. Inside were photographs, grainy at first glance, but unmistakable once you focused. Ethan in a hotel lobby, his hand at the small of Samantha's back. Ethan on the balcony of a suite, shirt undone, Samantha laughing as if the world was theirs. I stared at them so long my coffee went cold. For a moment, I told myself they could be staged, maybe old. But then I flipped to the last photo. Ethan. Kneeling, one knee pressed into the carpet, Samantha perched above him, her bare foot resting lightly on his thigh as he fastened her shoe. It wasn't just infidelity. It was devotion. 2 days later, a man approached me outside my studio. He wore a baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses even though it was cloudy. "Mrs. Cross," he said quietly, "I've got something you'll want to see." I should have walked away. Instead, I let him hand me a flash drive. That night, alone in my office, I clicked play. The video was shaky, filmed from a distance through half-closed curtains, but clear enough. Samantha in a towel, Ethan in a loosened tie, the two of them moving through a hotel room with the easy intimacy of people who had rehearsed this dance before. The man wanted $500,000 for silence. I laughed when I heard the number. Not because it was ridiculous, but because I knew exactly what to do with it. I gave him Ethan's number. Let him pay for his own secrets, and he did. The next day, Ethan's accounts bled $400,000. Proof not just of his betrayal, but of his fear. The money didn't bother me. What haunted me was the realization that all along, Samantha had never been a ghost haunting my marriage, she was the foundation of it. My life with Ethan was built on her shadow, and now that shadow had stepped into the light for everyone to see. I didn't leak the photos. Not yet. Power is about timing, and I wasn't going to waste mine on a single scandal. I waited, let him sweat, let him imagine what I might do. In every glance across the dinner table, every phone call he took behind a closed door, I saw the panic crawling under his skin, but photographs, videos, whispered rumors, those were only weapons. The real wound had been carved years before, the day I lost something that neither money nor revenge could ever bring back. And no matter how many times Ethan claimed I was still his wife, still his only choice, that memory was the one truth. I could never forgive, because before the scandals, before the lies, there was the child we never got to hold. There are wounds that never close, no matter how much time you stack on top of them. For me, it was the night I lost our child. I hadn't even known I was pregnant. Weeks of nausea, fatigue, a strange heaviness in my chest, it all made sense in that sterile hospital room when the doctor confirmed it. I was terrified but strangely hopeful. A child could have been our reset button, our reason to try again. Our anchor in a marriage already drifting apart, but fate never gave us the chance. It was supposed to be a routine day. We stopped at a highway service station on the way back from visiting my grandmother's grave. I remember telling Ethan I felt dizzy, that something was wrong. He brushed it off, already distracted by a call. When the bleeding started, panic swallowed me whole. I begged him to stay. I asked him to take me to the hospital. But the moment he heard Samantha's family had filed for bankruptcy, he made his choice. He shoved me into the back of a cab, muttered something about not being able to watch me in pain, and left for the airport. By nightfall, he was on a flight to Hong Kong, chasing her collapse as if it mattered more than mine. I miscarried alone. The pain was like knives twisting inside me, wave after wave that left me curled on a hospital bed, clutching sheets that smelled of bleach and despair. The nurse tried to soothe me, but nothing she said could fill the void where life had just been. Ethan came back a week later. He found me pale, hollow, stitched together by medication and silence. He kissed my forehead and whispered, "Don't be sad. We'll have another." As if children were replaceable. As if the one we lost didn't matter because there might be another someday. That was the moment something inside me died alongside that child. Whatever love I had left for him was buried in that hospital room, beneath the weight of machines and muted beeping. From then on, every smile, every kiss, every act of devotion he offered felt like counterfeit currency, bright on the surface, worthless underneath. He thought I had forgiven him. He thought time had blurred the edges of that night. But I remembered every second. And that scar, invisible to the world, was what sharpened every weapon I would ever raise against him, because a man who could abandon his wife in her darkest hour was not just unfaithful. He was unforgivable. And when I finally stood in the courtroom, across from him, staring at the man who had once been my entire world, I carried that truth like a blade. The day our divorce trial began, Los Angeles transformed into a circus. Reporters camped outside the courthouse steps like vultures circling fresh carrion. Their lenses glinted in the morning sun, each flashbulb ready to turn my private tragedy into public theater. Hollywood's golden couple crumbles, the headlines screamed, as if the implosion of my life was their morning coffee. Inside, the air was thick with perfume, paper, and the faint hum of whispers. Samantha wasn't on the witness list, but her presence hovered like smoke in every corner of that room. Ethan walked in wearing a tailored navy suit, the picture of control, as if charm and presentation could erase years of betrayal. He glanced at me once, eyes rehearsed to look wounded, and I almost laughed at the performance. He wasn't a husband defending love, he was an actor desperate to salvage his brand. The lawyers turned the trial into theater. Mine wielded photographs, bank records, and hotel receipts like blades. Theirs painted me as bitter, unstable, vengeful, an aging wife clinging to relevance. They called my testimony emotional exaggeration. As if grief could be quantified, as if miscarriages had footnotes. When the video surfaced, the one of Ethan and Samantha in the hotel, it was like a grenade rolled into the middle of the courtroom. Gasps echoed. A reporter outside screamed into her microphone, exclusive evidence of Hollywood's darkest affair. Ethan's jaw tightened, his composure cracking for the first time. But I didn't savor the victory. Watching the tape again felt like reliving a car crash. I didn't see proof of infidelity, I saw the moment my life was stolen from me. Outside, the frenzy only grew. Paparazzi swarmed like sharks scenting blood. Talk shows debated whether I was a wronged woman or a manipulative opportunist. Samantha's name trended daily, her face splashed across tabloids, her beauty dissected and praised while my pain was reduced to punchlines. Inside the courtroom, I realized something sharp and undeniable. This wasn't about who would win. Ethan had already lost me years ago. This was about who would survive, and survival, in Hollywood, isn't about truth. It's about power. As the gavel struck to end the day's session, the room buzzed with unfinished wars. Ethan smirked at me as though we were equals in some twisted game. But what he didn't understand was that I had stopped playing by his rules long ago, because outside those courtroom walls, the media storm wasn't just feeding on scandal, it was turning me into something I hadn't expected. Not a victim. Not even just a survivor. A force, and the deeper that storm raged, the closer I came to discovering a side of myself that even I hadn't known was waiting to be unleashed. For months, Samantha had been untouchable, the Hollywood princess who floated above scandal with diamonds on her wrists and champagne in her glass. Even when the whispers started, she smiled for cameras as if nothing could pierce her golden bubble. But every empire built on vanity eventually cracks. Hers collapsed faster than I expected. It began quietly. A leaked email thread between her and Ethan's lawyer surfaced online, exposing just how much influence she had in shaping his defense. The public had tolerated her as the other woman, but once she crossed into schemer, sympathy evaporated. Talk shows turned cruel. Hollywood seductress or manipulative fraud, one headline asked, plastered beside a photograph of her emerging from a nightclub, mascara streaked, her smile brittle. Then came the financial scandal. Samantha's family empire, already teetering on the edge, finally imploded. Bankruptcy filings revealed years of reckless spending and hidden debts. The tabloids devoured it, painting her as spoiled royalty stripped of her throne. The woman who once dripped in couture was suddenly auctioning off handbags to pay legal fees. I watched the downfall unfold not with glee, but with a strange numbness. Part of me had once envied her, the effortless beauty, the power, the way men seemed to orbit her like moths to a flame. But now, seeing her unravel, I recognized the truth: Samantha wasn't a queen. She was a puppet, strung up by an industry that adored her youth and discarded her the moment the shine dulled. the night her mugshot appeared on every news channel, I felt the final act of her collapse. Arrested for drunk driving on Sunset Boulevard, eyes glassy, hair matted, a faint trace of vomit on her blouse. It was the image of a woman stripped bare, no longer myth, no longer muse, just human wreckage, and yet, Ethan still defended her. Even as his own reputation bled out in the tabloids, he rushed to her side, insisting she was misunderstood. That loyalty, blind and pathetic, confirmed what I had known all along: I had never truly lost to Samantha. He had. Because by tethering himself to her spiral, he was dragging his own name into the abyss. The city devoured her with the same hunger it once used to praise her. And as she disappeared into rehab clinics and whispered rumors of overdoses, I realized something unexpected. Her collapse wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a shift. Because while Samantha crumbled, the spotlight that had once crushed me began to change direction. Suddenly, I wasn't just the betrayed wife. I was the survivor who had stood firm as Hollywood's most untouchable starlet burned to ash, and that shift, the transfer of power, was about to set the stage for a rebirth neither Ethan nor Samantha ever imagined I was capable of. If Samantha's collapse was a public spectacle, Ethan's unraveling was quieter, darker, and infinitely more dangerous. He had always thrived on control, the tailored suits, the effortless charm, the way he could walk into a room and bend it around his orbit. But when the scaffolding of his life started falling away, desperation took its place, raw and feral. At first, it was subtle. Phone calls late at night, his voice slurred, trying to convince me that we could still fix things. He spoke of rebuilding, of second chances, as if betrayal could be scrubbed clean with apologies. When I refused, the charm cracked. His words turned jagged. "Without me, you're nothing," he spat once, his voice trembling not with anger but with fear. Hollywood was turning on him. The endorsements that had once patted his ego and his bank account were vanishing. Scripts stopped arriving. Directors who used to fawn over him suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Even his friends, the ones who had always laughed a little too loudly at his jokes, stopped returning calls. He wasn't the golden man anymore. He was radioactive. I saw him one afternoon, outside a cafe in West Hollywood. His suit hung loose on his frame, his eyes sunken, his hands shaking as he lit a cigarette with the clumsy panic of a man drowning. The paparazzi had circled him, capturing every twitch, every puff of smoke. One shouted, "Ethan, how's Samantha?" He flinched as if the words were bullets. That photo made the front page the next day, captioned, "From star to scandal." But the most haunting part wasn't his public decline, it was his private rage. He began sending letters, handwritten, desperate scribbles that read like manifestos. Pleas mixed with threats, apologies tangled with accusations. One read, "You don't understand what you've done. You've destroyed everything. And when a man has nothing left, he becomes dangerous." That line echoed in my head like a warning bell. I had seen Ethan angry before, but this was different. This was a man cornered, stripped of power, clawing at the walls of a world that no longer wanted him. And I knew enough about desperate men to understand they were capable of anything, yet, strangely, I didn't feel fear. Not anymore. I felt clarity. His unraveling wasn't just his punishment, it was his legacy. He had gambled everything on Samantha, on lies, on an illusion of power, and now he was losing it all in real time, and as he spiraled further into the abyss, I began to feel something ignite in me. Strength. Freedom. A strange, almost terrifying sense of rebirth, because Ethan's desperation wasn't just the final act of our marriage, it was the fuel for my transformation, and that transformation was about to carry me into the firestorm I had once feared, but was now ready to claim as my own. When the storm finally passed, silence felt almost unnatural. For years, my life had been a carousel of scandals, courtrooms, headlines, whispers in Hollywood's gilded corridors. And then, one day, it all just stopped. Samantha faded into the background, a tragic footnote in the gossip columns. Ethan disappeared almost entirely, retreating into the shadows where broken idols go when the spotlight no longer wants them. I was left standing in the ruins, and for the first time in years, the air felt breathable. There were no more reporters on my driveway, no more lawyers drafting press releases, no more whispered pity from acquaintances pretending they cared. Just me. And the quiet hum of a city that had nearly swallowed me whole, but it was in that quiet that I began to see myself clearly. For so long, my reflection had been defined by someone else's gaze, Ethan's approval, Samantha's shadow, the public's judgment. Now, staring into the mirror, I saw the woman who had survived it all. Bruised, yes. Scarred, undeniably. But also unshaken in ways I hadn't expected. The losses still haunted me. The child I never got to hold, the trust one had once believed. Unbreakable, the years sacrificed to a facade that was never real. Those were wounds that time couldn't fully erase. And yet, they weren't just scars. They were reminders. Proof that I had walked through fire and emerged, if not unburned, then at least unbroken. People often imagine closure as some neat ending, a bow tied around the chaos. That wasn't what I found. Closure, for me, was standing in the rubble. And realizing I no longer needed answers from Ethan, or apologies from Samantha, or validation from the crowd. Closure was knowing that I had taken back my voice, my story, and my power, and maybe that was what frightened Hollywood the most, that a woman could lose everything they told her mattered and still find herself stronger without it, because my story wasn't just about betrayal or loss. It was about survival, reinvention, and the kind of resilience you only discover when the world has already tried to bury you. And as I looked ahead, one thought crystallized in my mind. My past wasn't a chain anymore. It was the foundation for something entirely new, which brings me to where I stand now, on the edge of a new beginning, ready to write the next chapter not as someone's wife or rival, but as myself, the first. Morning I woke up alone in my new home. I expected to feel hollow. The kind of emptiness that comes after years of giving yourself away, only to realize there's nothing left. But instead, I felt something I hadn't known in years: stillness. Not silence born from fear or suppression, but a stillness that belonged to me. I walked barefoot across the wooden floor, the sun filtering through the curtains in a way that made everything glow gold. No paparazzi waiting at the gate. No lawyers on hold. No husband rehearsing apologies he didn't mean. Just the sound of my breath, steady and unbroken. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. I had started small, almost timidly, as if I didn't fully believe I had the right to exist outside the chaos. A painting class tucked into a quiet corner of downtown. Volunteering at a foundation for women clawing their way out of destructive marriages, just like I had. Speaking engagements where I told my story, not the tabloid version, not the headlines, but the raw, unpolished truth of what it meant to rebuild from nothing. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to construct a life that wasn't built on performance or pretense. A life where I was no longer the wife of Ethan Cross, no longer the shadow of Samantha Hart, no longer a pawn in Hollywood's twisted game of appearances. I was simply Victoria. And for once, that was enough. Of course, ghosts never disappear entirely. I still saw Ethan's name in trade papers sometimes, attached to smaller projects that never quite regained the magic. I still caught Samantha's face in old photographs that magazines recycled whenever they needed a cautionary tale. But those ghosts no longer had power over me. They were echoes of a past that no longer defined me. If anything, they were reminders that I had walked through fire and built something stronger out of the ashes. People ask me now if I regret it, if I regret the years, the pain, the betrayals. And the truth is complicated. Part of me wishes I could reclaim what was lost. But another part of me knows I would never have found this version of myself without walking through the storm. Rebirth doesn't come from safety. It comes from destruction. It comes from letting everything fall apart and then daring to rise from what's left, and that's exactly what I've done. My story doesn't end in scandal or tragedy. It ends here, with me standing on my own 2 feet, breathing freely, ready to step into a future that belongs only to me. But maybe it doesn't really end at all. Because this isn't the final chapter. It's only the beginning of a story I'm finally brave enough to write for myself. In the end, Hollywood didn't break me, it forced me to be reborn. And maybe that's the truest story of all. If this journey moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me as we uncover more stories hidden behind the facade.